You hear the words Tourette syndrome, and for a lot of us, a very specific and, let's be honest, often inaccurate image pops into our heads, one that's usually been shaped by movies and TV. So in this explainer, we're going to peel back those stereotypes and take a look at the neurological reality behind the condition.
Okay, let's just pause for a sec. When I say Tourette's, what's the very first thing that comes to mind? Is it someone shouting out swear words? Yeah, if that's what you thought, you're definitely not alone. But that image, the one we see all the time in the media, it only tells a tiny piece of the real story. In fact, this number right here, this is why that image is so misleading. That specific symptom, it's called coprolalia, the involuntary swearing. It only affects about 10% of people with Tourette's. Just 10%. It gets all the attention for sure, but it is nowhere near the most common symptom. And get this, it's not even required for a diagnosis. The reality for the other 90% is something else entirely.
So if it's not really about the swearing, then what is it? Well, here's the actual clinical definition. And the key words to zero in on are neurodevelopmental motor disorder. This is so important because it puts Tourette's exactly where it belongs, in the world of neurology. We're talking about how the brain is wired to control movement, not some kind of behavioral choice or a mental health problem.
Okay, so to really get a handle on Tourette's, we need to talk about its absolute core feature, which is the tic. And believe me, a tic is way more than just a random little twitch.
This is where things get really fascinating. You see this term? Premonitory urge. For almost everyone with Tourette's, a tic doesn't just happen out of the blue. It's kicked off by this internal feeling. And that comparison to a sneeze or an itch, it's absolutely perfect. You know that feeling, right? That little buildup of pressure where you just know you have to sneeze? That's what we're talking about. And this quote from some of the research just nails the experience. It talks about a buildup of tension, pressure, or energy. But look at the last part. They ultimately choose consciously to release. That's huge. It tells us that tics aren't completely involuntary, like a knee-jerk reflex. A better word is involuntary. It's a conscious response to a really overwhelming, unwanted feeling. So you can think of it like this little three-step cycle. First, you've got that urge, that pressure building up. Step 2, the tic happens. Could be an eye blink, a shoulder shrug, a little sound. And then step 3, a sense of relief. For a little while anyway. Just like after you finally let out that sneeze. And this cycle, it explains why someone with Tourette's can sometimes hold their tics in. But it's exhausting, and trying to suppress them often means they just come out bigger and stronger later on. But here's a really important thing to understand. Tourette's rarely travels alone. For so many people, the tics are just one part of a much bigger picture. And often, it's the other conditions that come along for the ride that are actually more challenging to deal with. Just take a look at this chart. This is from data from specialty clinics. And wow, is it revealing. When you look at people who are getting specialized care, only about 40% of them have just Tourette's. The majority, a full 60%, also have ADHD or OCD or even both. So you can't really talk about Tourette's without talking about these other conditions. And the impact of these co-occurring conditions can be huge. The attention and focus issues from ADHD can cause real problems at school or in relationships. And the kind of OCD that often goes with Tourette's is a little different. It's more focused on things like counting, symmetry, needing things to be just right. And it's often driven by that same premonitory urge we just talked about. The bottom line is, for a lot of people, managing the ADHD or OCD is a way bigger part of their day than managing the tics themselves. All right, so what's actually going on inside the brain? What's the science behind all this? Let's dive in. Right off the bat, you should know there isn't like one single Tourette's gene or one single cause we can point to. It's a classic case of nature and nurture. There's a really strong genetic component for sure, but that can be influenced by all sorts of environmental factors, especially things that happen during pregnancy and early development. And if you want to see just how strong that genetic link is, twin studies are the perfect example. Look at this chart. If one identical twin has Tourette's, there's a super high chance, somewhere between 50 and 77%, that the other twin will have it too. But now look at fraternal twins who share less of their DNA. That chance plummets. That's some of the strongest evidence you can get for genes playing a major role. Okay, so we know genes are involved, but what are they actually doing in the brain? Well, it seems to be an issue with the brain's communication network. You can think of it like faulty wiring in the circuits connecting some really key parts of the brain. You've got the basal ganglia, that's kind of like the brain's gear shift for movement, and it seems to be in overdrive. Then you have the frontal cortex, which is supposed to hit the brakes, but it isn't doing its job as well as it should.
And the thalamus, which handles sensory information, is in on it too. It's this miscommunication that ultimately leads to the tics. All right, let's get to what's arguably the most important part. What does this all mean for someone living with Tourette's? What are the management strategies? And what does the future look like? Because the outlook is actually really hopeful.
So when it comes to treatment, it's not about jumping straight to medication. The absolute first step, the foundation of everything, is psychoeducation. That's really just a fancy word for learning everything you can about the condition and finding good support. And honestly, for a lot of people, that's enough. If more is needed, the next step is behavioral therapy, like something called habit reversal training. That teaches you to recognize that urge coming on and respond with a different, less noticeable movement. Medication is really only for cases where the tics are severe and are getting in the way of daily life.
And this timeline, this might be the most hopeful part of this whole explainer. You see, Tourette's typically follows a very predictable path. The tics usually show up in early childhood. They tend to be at their worst during those pre-teen years, around 8 to 12. And then, and this is the key part, for the vast majority of people, the tics naturally start to get better as they move through their teenage years and into adulthood.
Yeah, let's put a real number on that hopeful outlook. We're talking about 80%. Almost 8 out of every 10 kids with Tourette's will see their tics get way, way better by the time they're adults. For many, the tics go away completely. So that idea of Tourette's being this severe, lifelong burden, for most people, that's just another myth.
And you know what's really amazing? For some people, that unique brain wiring that causes Tourette's can actually become a source of incredible strength. Take Tim Howard, the legendary U.S. soccer goalie. He actually credits his Tourette's with giving him the enhanced perception and acute focus that made him one of the best in the world. How cool is that?
So let's bring it all home. The biggest takeaway here is that Tourette's is not a punchline. It's a really complex neurological condition, defined by that internal premonitory urge. It often comes with friends like ADHD and OCD. It's got a strong genetic link, and for most people, the outlook is genuinely positive. So now that we know what it really is, the question for all of us is how can we use this knowledge to change the conversation and build a little more understanding?